So, let's dive into one of the most pivotal and honestly most misunderstood periods in all of American history, the final years of Reconstruction. We're talking about a brief, explosive moment that was filled with extraordinary hope and, at the same time, just brutal resistance. How it all collapsed would go on to define the struggle for equality for the next 100 years.
And really, it all comes down to this one big question, right? Was Reconstruction this genuine, incredible attempt to build a real multiracial democracy from the ashes of the Civil War? Or was it a promise that was just ultimately and tragically broken? Well, as you're about to see, the answer is really, really complex.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the incredible promise of this new era. Then, we'll get into the rise of terror that met that promise head-on. After that, we'll see the amazing fight for a voice against all odds. Then the political deal that ended it all, the Compromise of 1877. And finally, we'll wrap up with its unfinished legacy.
All right, first up, a new era's promise. You have to picture it. After 4 long, bloody years of civil war, the United States had 2 gigantic tasks. 1, stitch the country back together, and 2, for the very first time, figure out what freedom actually meant for millions of newly freed African Americans.
And this really gets to the heart of it. The challenge wasn't just slavery is over. No, it was about building a whole new society. I mean, how do you integrate 4 million people as full citizens, giving them the right to vote, to own land, to get an education, when a huge part of the country was dead set on stopping it from ever happening?
Which, of course, brings us to our next chapter, the rise of terror. Because for every single step forward that was made for civil rights, there was an immediate, organized, and violent backlash designed to drag all of that progress back into the mud.
And the face of that backlash was the Ku Klux Klan. Now let's be really clear, founded in 1866, this was not some small fringe group. This was a widespread terrorist organization, and it had one very clear mission: use absolute brutality to restore white supremacy and completely destroy any political power that African Americans and their allies were gaining.
And their violence wasn't random at all. It was a calculated campaign of terror. They specifically targeted voters. They went after community leaders, teachers, anyone, black or white, who supported equality. The whole point was to create a climate of fear so intense that it would paralyze people, stop them from even daring to vote or assert their basic human rights.
But here's the thing. This is not just a story of oppression, not by a long shot. Because in the face of all that terror, there was this incredible story of empowerment and resistance. And that brings us to our third section, a fight for a voice.
And this is so crucial. These communities didn't just endure the violence, they organized. They formed political leagues, they used new organizations like the Freedmen's Bureau to help with education and legal aid, and most importantly, they grabbed onto the right to vote with this unbelievable enthusiasm, seeing it as the true key to protecting their freedom.
And all of that led to something that was just revolutionary. For the very first time in American history, black men were elected to public office. We're talking everything from local sheriffs all the way up to the U.S. Congress. I mean, can you imagine? This was a breathtaking achievement that completely upended the idea of who could be a citizen and who could be a leader in America.
Which, just makes what happened next all the more tragic. Because all of this historic progress, it was basically dismantled by a single, shady, backroom deal, the Compromise of 1877. So, the presidential election of 1876 was an absolute mess. So close that nobody knew who won. To solve it, an informal deal was cut. The Republican, Rutherford B. Hayes, gets to be president. And the price? The federal government had to pull its last remaining troops out of the South. The very soldiers who are the last line of defense protecting the rights of black citizens.
And this one decision set off an immediate, devastating domino effect. The second the federal troops were gone, the last of the Reconstruction governments just collapsed. White Southern Democrats, they called themselves Redeemers, swept right back into power, and they immediately started building the whole system of legal segregation and voter suppression that we now know as Jim Crow.
And that, finally, brings us to the unfinished legacy. Because the fallout from this one compromise didn't just last for a few years. Oh no. It would define the entire struggle for racial justice for the next century, and you could argue, even to this day.
The immediate consequences were just catastrophic. All those hard-won protections were just stripped away. The constitutional amendments, the new civil rights laws, they were essentially made worthless in the South. And racial discrimination wasn't just allowed, it became the law of the land, institutionalized and enforced.
But the legacy isn't just one of failure. That's so important to remember. The era also proved the incredible, profound resilience of African Americans who had, for that brief moment, tasted real political power. It showed everyone that the struggle for equality was far, far from over, and it absolutely set the stage for the heroic civil rights movements that would rise up decades later to reclaim those very same promises.
And that's really the main takeaway here. This isn't just some dusty old history. If you really want to understand the ongoing fight for equality in America today, you have to understand what was gained and what was so tragically lost during those final turbulent years of Reconstruction.